Okay. 네, 참말로 다시들래. 참 그도 되어 있어요.
Tashidileg everyone. I hope all of you are keeping well.
Okay. 다가서 너무도 못 써라.
So let us start with a prayer.
상제주다
소지 조나라의 전주바드 나니 저수진 나게 진소 집에 총남진 돌아 펜신 상제 두바이쇼
상제주다
소지 조나라의 전주바드 나니 저수진 나게 진소 집에 총남진 돌아 펜신 상제 두바이쇼 소지 조나라 전주바드 다니 저수진 다게 진소 집에 총남진 돌아 빈신 상제 두바이쇼
승장 당제 대화다 대외 주단 demba 주지 동해다 동해게 주단 대화지 동해 매베 대화 담바 담인 대화지 예레 저다 니다 대외 다녀 쳔발라 대화주지 승장 당제 대화다 대외 주단 demba 주지 동해다 동해게 주단 대화주지 동해 매베 대화 담인 대화주지 예레 저다 니다 대외 다녀 쳔발라 대화주지 승장 당제 대화다 대외 주단 demba 주지 동해다 동해게 주단 대화주지 동해 매베 대화 담바 담인 대화주지 예레 차다
대외
다녀 쳔발라 대화주지 다 고주 건강들아. 다 내리셔 고주 건강들라 난들라다. 레퍼치비 람치 스크라사 레퍼치비 람konchi sunamyeshi rasapes dawa nyala karma yi khot namba kanchi kororo ledreda tadin tanda din nalo la karlela na ane leperchibi salankonchi sonam da yehi ta sonam da yehi chola isra sonam chola yeshi chola sono yeshi rapsape le tende choni ji is dawa nya khanwala kama is khod sa namba kanji korwas kornes nepa thi che saje ji shaki is ta thil lati ledra shaki is thima ribi momba sewa mima teres Chime ren chen barwa chiwa te chirpi cha ti se seji toro sachiba nao wankurwa chibe isla later.
So now verse number 95. Through excellently practicing all paths, they have gathered merit, garnered wisdom full. So they're like the harvest moon on high, surrounded by its court, the clustered stars. So herein it talks about the importance of, stresses the importance of the accumulation of both merit and wisdom in the spiritual path to achieve enlightenment. And the metaphor herein used is the harvest moon, the full moon, surrounded by stars. So wisdom that is embraced by the accumulation of merit. Yes.
Ela wala shimadi karana sanje shagi nimate resta sanje shagi nimate time renche barchites seji to ankowe anko wani kondo tsol slara tadi nalo la danda kor danda la da tsawadina sanje ji shagi isa tendo tsasa
Tar di tanda shine lo jogor.
Tanda di insere korone di Dotsasa. This truth. The code number kanji koros number kanji koros sasa. Then tagaranje machine gudra. Maybe this is Sanjay Shaggy on the code. Sanjay is Shaggy is Tima Ribe Mombasa Chibe Nimateres Tima maybe Ramchin Barochivatis Seji is a torture Sachiba wala Sachiba no that's a
Ti drojur tagin ganding anzo yarmoela.
the coronida Neji Carse Seji is a torture Sachiba no Uncle Tenikon Solosler. That's a child edition.
Yes.
Tinal engineer something.
Tagarang reduda. So moving on, with a hand like the sun, Buddha holds a flawless gem with light ablates, and with this the enlightened one empowers the most senior heirs, the Abhisheka, greatest of them all. So herein we are talking about how the wisdom that the Buddha holds is free from all contamination, all stains, and this wisdom exactly is the truest of all empowerments. And this wisdom empowers the most senior heirs. Herein refers to, we discussed the 10 grounds, the bodhisattvas along the 10 grounds, and out of these, the bodhisattvas on the 10th ground is referred to as the most senior heirs.
Nenjo Chembu Kasa Nenjo Chembu Ternes Mombe Membe Jiden Nam Dunghe Iwa Jiba Las Thai Chenji Zichurnes Lara Tadin Nenjo Bachimbu Sachubawa Te Wankoa Terres Nenes Mombe Menching is a new moment, the Mombe mention new Mombe is in Jiden Nam Dunghe is in Jiba Las Thai Chenji is Ziba Zichurnes later.
So moving on, verse number 97. The mighty yogis and yoginis living on this plane referring to the 10th bhumi, look with godlike eyes on worldly beings, inferior because of mental blindness, whom suffering can frighten and distract. Mental blindness herein refers to the affliction and obscurations. So since sentient beings in samsara are still bound by affliction and the obscurations, then they do have the experiences of suffering. And now yogis and yoginis on the 10th ground look at these worldly beings, these sentient beings with godlike eyes. They see through them.
That's all. They equally say nam beba meba junjurte mombe memba 슈데이 go nang jebar jeba ins lara tadiladi te iku la de gala ta teloko da shangchu samba te is kule se namsa toje ji is beba mebar jua tes timu ki so mombi o takanda dile do tim tena gombar jibai sara ani di karsana jiten le sa phape tele jis tadenge di chaw de tusanda di kan diska
Gobju gobje tandati.
disu dile ta apin de ta chemba tapena thaisen le dosa sa tsa che del tene sa shangchu sembara tene shangchu te ikule di shangchu sembadela kola te ikule se namlara ani te toje ji sembaba na cheban junwa te timu ki so mombe momba se te sa shu namla nambe shuba nan jube sen jiten te tabi so gom namsa njebar te jiten pala sa penbi chele yin.
So now moving on, these verses talk about the activities of the enlightened beings for the sake of sentient beings who still circle through samsara. And now in this, the most important activity that enlightened beings, herein referring to those bodhisattvas on the 10th ground, the 10th bhumi, do is to illuminate that naturally abiding quality in the sentient beings themselves. So having seen them, light rays from their bodies shine without the slightest strain at all and open up what gates they are for all who wander in their confusions dark. So this refers to the fact that the bodhisattvas are able to effortlessly help others also come to realize that naturally abiding quality which is at this point covered by obscurations and afflictions.
Tini hache nyangin de namlas hami nyangi debar deus dini nyangde neba ni tima me par century pa osla tadila da tinde hache tanda dil tensa de la kaisna jiten le sen deba la pembi se chenle ne hache ji sen nyangi le deba toba namsa hami ji sen nyangi deba sa gobar deus kaptene nyangde nyangin deba ni kan sena tima me par sa sem sene yonsu chuba osla.
So now moving on, herein this verse 99 makes a distinction between nirvana with remainder and nirvana without remainder. So the first two lines, those who have reached nirvana, herein refers to liberation, not enlightenment. And those who have reached liberation with remainder, those who have reached nirvana with remainder, believe they have reached nirvana that's without. So even though you have achieved nirvana, which still has some remainder herein referring to some seeds of confusion still left, some seeds of affliction, obscuration still left. But even when you do achieve a nirvana with remainder, those who achieve it believe that they have achieved nirvana without remainder. But if you practice according to this tradition, nirvana at this point would be free from any seeds of confusion, would be free of any seeds of affliction and obscuration. Thus.
Tanana simjin kunji ngumepi ngo teang techu yus tetong shangchu semba sang por leda hende trimi chuji gus leda dila kasna tanda senji kun la simjin kun la da kunzub jire da tende kunzub ji simjin kun ji so ngobo mebi ngo semji sa rangshin se wa teyang se nyang de ti ju se te se zobar thong we se sachiba wa se wanku wa shangchu semba was.
So moving on, sentient beings' essence free of substance is the spirit that is encountered on this plane. Seeing this is the royal bodhicitta, the Dharmakaya, free of every flaw. So as we discussed extensively before, the Dharmadhatu that we are talking about here is not a functional thing. It's an abiding quality. So that is exactly what it means, essence of substance. Essence free of substance. So sentient beings' essence free of substance is the spirit that is encountered on this plane. So at the 10th bhumi, sentient beings or the practitioner is able to actualize that naturally abiding quality, and seeing this, actualizing this is actual bodhicitta, and this bodhicitta is no other than the embodiment of Dharmadhatu in the form of Dharmakaya, free from every flaw.
Tadilada and Tamadela ani Tima maybe chukulas, Yehe Jaso Nechune, Haso Nobu Chijent, Tele Sinjin, Zayes Lara. Tadilada Tende Sachibu Tatubi is a hint Tima maybe Chujikus, Tima maybe Chujikulas, Nanka Kawa, Sever Meba, Tatas, Yehe Jaso Chunes. Deba tangji chajin se pebes tazu nobu chishin te chuku tele se simjen tangji ji den nam jicha de hanji se tuba kowa chisi ji se part zes.
So now the last verse, when the Dharmakaya is seen in its all its purity, this is transformation, wisdom's sea. And from its depth, a wealth of precious jewels fulfill beings' needs as they have always wished. So the first two lines, when the Dharmakaya is seen in its all its purity, it refers to the stainless nature of the Dharmakaya, stainless nature of the Dharmadhatu being embodied in the form of Dharmakaya. And then this transformation, wisdom's sea. So the sea is vast. So this touches upon the boundless nature of the wisdom that is cultivated in that stainless state. And as such, since this wisdom is boundless in its nature, cultivated in the stainless, uncontaminated form, then at this point, the enlightened beings are able to fulfill all needs, all wishes of sentient beings who themselves are boundless and as vast as the as space. Zos.
Takanda di dana karsana Jinagi tanda di ganza chingi teba ani gomul rugu tsang shaji dila tez dura shiji insu teba dala jagaji kembo ani karsa
Krishna Pandit
da ani lo tsawa tsiruro rugi ji shaji ridara stum yak jiwas.
So then herein ends the actual root text itself, and then what follows is a colophon, the original colophon in praise of Dharmadhatu composed by the great Acharya Nāgārjuna is hereby completed. And this translation into Tibetan was composed in cooperation with the Indian Kempo means abbot, the Indian abbot Krishna Pandit, and translated from Sanskrit to Tibetan by the Lotsawa means translator, Tsudrim Jawa.
Tatende inde tanda di nalo la shie de sidang ngone tabu dura kale kabu du de ine ta anja ju kom so lo ande che de ti che chambura sidang ge je zo de kala na ma se de ko de na tongba ni she de da ine o de la ma ani ji pe da de ne ma bo jang de zam zang so go chue kale kabu dura ne ta de la chik so so yu wa mai ba yang sin de wa sim ba ta ti zu chu na de lo na ani kali singra ya.
So now, as we have completed the root text itself, I think all of us can agree that it wasn't really easy to follow along. It's difficult, admittedly difficult and hard. But when we look at the text overall, the main topic seems to touch on emptiness. And now, in its exploration of emptiness, it employs a lot of metaphors, a lot of examples, which makes it a little bit difficult to follow at times. But with that being said, one should not be discouraged from exploring this text further, simply because it was tough to approach at first. So I would encourage and advise all of you to continue to explore and study this text by referring to other commentaries and so forth. So, any questions?
So, as a person, you are existing as a dependent arising, which is constantly changing. So, however, you are also creating karma. So, my question is to whom is this karma getting assigned to?
지금 뭐이 간주 미래 디텐데로스 강사래죠라 미 강사래 디텐데로스 아니 텐데라도 좀바 아니 주의 속바라 딱바 메주직 주의 속바 주다 젠 주기 젠 속바 딱바 메주지 아니 주르데 괜치기 델라테네 텐데라기로스 이나야 아니 미 야나 강사지기 레사래 지도스 레사긴디다 레디술로 주기요레스 레 죽사기 사긴 미죠 어디술로 주기요레스
네네 다가 그 딜레스 나도 젠지 살아 젠지 사운지 레 텐데죠 레 미딘 주도라다 경고차 페나 pugu 친주가 레가 뭐 사이나 경고가름 해도 드려라 이는 거기서는 파 사바보드가 로친지네 거다 아니 레리 용하보드 아니 지마 전부 잘 나와라 다 딘데로 차도도 레디라 얘들이 다 간다 아래 단답변한 가족이 미치나로라 아니 수수기 레ኛ 바지 사유나라 지미기 집보기 레로다 간다 지 사유나 nganzu lude de gedor ra lude de gengo chawor de nganzu gi jendi man rongi gi ta nganzu gi nam che jira tela nyongo ora tela nyongo bi chane ani nganzu gi ta le sa ne su nyongo le de dira ina ya zaza nganzu tande sa ne jo juma de nyongo de gala tanda pe na ngado na da ho ma re shuma shi de jawa shamba ji le de nyoni de shamba ji cha ro ro chai da ina ya nganzu lude je ro gor de nam she de mutu ne ro ora
So maybe this is a question which comes if you begin to think about it in this manner, that when you are young, you have accumulated some bad karma, then when you grow up, you are no longer the same person. For example, to think about it, when you are young, you are someone else, and then when you grow up, you are no longer that young child. It comes from a consideration like that, maybe. But from a Buddhist perspective, the person is not posited as that change. That change. The person is posited as the continuum of consciousness. The continuum of consciousness. So the continuum of consciousness remains when you are a child, even when you turn into an adult. And similarly, for example, it might be the case that Dawa Dolma, the Geshema, stops existing at the moment of death. But the continuum of the consciousness which travels into the next life carries the karma. The imprint is left on the continuum of the consciousness. So that is exactly wherein the imprint or the karma comes to ripen in the continuum of the conscious.
Constantly changing, so then the imprints are also constantly changing, or are they not?
Tini nganzuki parja shagyo re lagyo rawas di sheba gi jula sheba gi junde la parja shagyo le zama sheba korang la pasamlo tang do nasra sheba korang takba marwas sheba korang takba mena tekan la thakbe parja de takba chagi marwas en cheza parja la di takba re takba marwas
parja takba pena kinage pena ngazu thari legaji chido ra thari pena ngazu pena kiuro tain dupuro chaina ta khanda ngazu chi chala sawro chi thong okay chi thong yuna ra thari ngazu dili chi thong re 라 다 산이 딘다고 징언도 통오나 람사 가상에만 통주도 챙이다 티 칼나 그 셈버들 바샤샤라 가상 지나게 되잘래도 통오면은 다리 안들 람수치 챙야지민다 라 다리야 싸워 통오라 세상 파기기 유디겐 주도래 통행의 넘버 10대 주도래 이내 가져라 시스 대로도 바샤실라네 라 배는 가서 잠자 보고 친구 가서 내가 소소지 야도 가르치나 잠자 친구 차리야 딘다오도 친 니만 안 되지 제뉴일은 땡땡이다 이내 디티즈데 로다다 참아 여는 로사라 이내 단도 가서 지 판스 차야지도 다 바찰래는 가서 단다 나셔들 봐 도도는 때요만데 샤난 되지 인사라 지당 가서 긴 생인을야 되지 시랑 마보여 라다 참아 자청부되나 그거 말아
되니 바자 샤사기 시바지어라 디 카레라 샤기오나
바차에서 시바디 간데 샤오래
시바딜라당 안조
시바디
어
예 나실 샤오
왕원에도 다 인기 말아
뭐 통화다 거기 언시디 그 당 쳐거라 이는 가서 얘기 시발라 바지
시바디
얘기 시발라 샤오
So no, it is not the case that the imprints or the imprints are permanent in their nature. This is not the case at all. The imprints, the karmic imprints, are not permanent in their nature. Now, it is also important to understand that the imprints are left on the mental consciousness as opposed to the sense consciousness. This is important to understand. And now, if we are to make sense of imprints, karmic imprints, maybe try to think about it in this manner. Even though there is not something specifically that you can point to and say that that is an imprint, but it is established through our own experience. For example, let's say that a few days ago you saw an object that is totally new to you. Yes? You see it for the first time and an object that is totally new to you. Now after a few days passes, even if you don't see the same exact object again, but if you see something similar to the object, to that object, then what happens to the manner in which you relate to that object? Immediately the imprint comes to ripen at that moment. Oh, this is something similar to what I saw before. So that's the manner in which imprints work. They need the right causes and conditions to manifest, to ripen. And similarly, even when we think about something that we did in our childhood, something we think that we might have forgotten, but sometimes when we look back at it, there's still a memory of it. That's the function of imprint. Yes.
가서 나도 엔데래야 보고 준주지 지금 보고 신라 말아지 그런게 얘기도 야고 신경이나래 봐 같이 한 내가 레레베 제 도모 많이 보이도 아니 콜라 바차 쉬도래도 kallan ko ngima chidi bi tapji ani tande khol chi khare ne chede bo shede bo tende jido kasna digi ngima da kan so jidange bachalan ba dos te me ba ina ku it ten shede laura tende si hadeura digi ani lamsa ten chu jodo chi che chu pena ngazo lega khare ne ngima chi che nyuji di shuma chidi deuda tende de ne sa chi che mani ne khande khande so che hagumda tende ro.
So this is the reason why in Tibetan we say, now in other cultures maybe you use terms such as like God-given gift. For example, when you see a young child who is especially sharp, who is especially skilled in something, then we use in other cultures terms such as God-given talent, God-given gift. But in Tibetan Buddhist circles we use the term that, oh, he has a very good karmic imprint, because in his past life he has accumulated or engaged in that act, and as such there is a strong imprint left in his consciousness, such that in this life he or she, the child, doesn't have to extend so much energy to learn something, to become skilled in something. And this makes sense when you try to think about it in this manner, that if we have not done an activity ever in our lives, and if we have to do it for the first time, there is some resistance, there is some struggle that we feel. But if you have done it already, then the next time it's a little bit easier than the first time. Yes. Questions?
So, because this text talks a lot about emptiness, I
I didn't quite catch that.
How does one become more in harmony with the law of cause and effect?
Plus, tini tandang anzuki tsawa digi tombani gola mambu sungi godoas. Tsawa digi. Yina ya dang anzuki samlo chik tana sara ni junde luwa meba la jira. Junde luwa meba la di la pha ni tombani dan junde luwa meba la di pha samro jorne ra. Nyamling kapsamba. Tinde doji sotuna ya bodoas ra. Kai sina korangi nyiman rere la tende gi menga nga jira. 어디 야야 조르게스라 고랑기 텐데라 코아소라디 냠랭기 주소 텐데기 코아티다 준델로와 메바레라 해줘라 테니 참로 조르 칸데스 조르투고르게스
되죠 지당한도 진델로와 메발라디가 수수기 주단 데부니들 로와 메발라디 수수기 주칸데지 사이너라 아니 데부도 뇽고레라 로와 메발라디가 전전한테 소유나 코랑기 제반하신 데부 마면은 lö셔라 미지네 chunala 아니 지치인다라 아니 jel라지 독바치긴라나레 chunala 지티긴라나레 간다 켈렌 담제지 제유나 타마들라 마제와이나 미들 흐르 고고 땅라 와 딘데우에 레지 사이네 레잉바 사이나레 야포 사이나레 티긴 데부 마메네 와 데부 메야 메바든지나 니 가시 여로 야포 사이나 쿨 데부 데하고 엠바 가시기 배는 주둥이는 먹여 가지사는 콜라 둥이 오야면 렌데 루어라 제전 렌데 물로와인자 소소기 강사와디 야보치나 디긴데부 용거래 두자사이나 디긴데부 용거래스 다이네야 단단한서 레레야 사탄기 쳐보다 레 슈침보다 레 딩딩다 레베 칼로테 레 춘주사야 주라 근데 레 렘딜라 때니 데부디야 카투카도 해야 이게 봐레 슈침보이나 만 통전용적이 딜레 셴바지나 아니 렌라 셴라뉴 딜레양 레뉴이나 렌라 셴베 셴발라뉴 근데 이네 간지 만지 수수 강사샤와디 아니 용고와지 라 근데 아니 렌데 로아메 발라 부디티 셴야보다
So then if we are to think about the law of causality within the framework of emptiness and similar to how emptiness is the true nature of reality how then we should also be able to understand the infallible nature of law of causality itself, the infallible, the undeceiving nature of the law of causality itself. This is important to understand. Rather than simply looking at it as the law of causality, it is important to understand the undeceiving nature, the infallible nature of law of causality. Now, in this, when we say that the law of causality is infallible, undeceivable, it means, in effect, really that nothing really is accidental, that everybody comes from causes and conditions, that causes and conditions. Now, if we have to reflect on this further, when we use terms such as infallible and undeceiving, when we think about the law of causality, try to think about it in this manner. If you accept to help someone, if you say that, okay, I'm going to help you with something, and then come the time when you really need to help someone, then if you don't offer them the help that they need, then you are deceptive, deceiving in your nature. So that's not the way karma works. Karma, once accumulated, will manifest itself in the form of a result. That's the nature of karma. And now, more particularly, from virtuous actions, joy and happiness comes as a result. From non-virtuous actions, suffering and pain comes as a result. That's a more close reading of the infallible nature of karma. And it is not the case that a karma begins to dissipate or disappear on its own accord. A karma will manifest itself in the form of a result sooner or later. Now, with that being said, there is such a thing called the potency of the karma, the strength of the karma that one accumulates. Now, this depends on the intention and so many other factors as well. So, when we are trying to think about the infallible nature of the law of causality, more particularly karma, it is important that we do not base that within the karma or the effect ripening in this very lifetime. If we only think about that, then it is a little bit difficult to appreciate it. There are many karma which are strong in its nature, that manifests itself, ripens itself in this very lifetime. Then there are also karma which ripens in the very next lifetime. And then there are karma which takes hundreds and hundreds of births to manifest. So it depends on the factor of strength and other conditions, the manner in which it manifests itself. Yes.
Tiji tanda dina ko de uchi sonda gen pe den ta bai ra dina kala na tayang se shindong tabu la sra rangchu mutu rangchu tu ma la na ju go ra rangchu mutu pa se jeba nas rang shindong tabu de rangchu mutu pa je yundu kala ane tela tene me par muko waras shenda la tengo bako rangchu mutu pa la chanji ge change la tengo ba de khong de ra tende indi kala ane shuji ko wa ta se te de shenda la se tene yu chu jeba na kesi shenda la tene pa yore la ne kesi ba jo wa ina te rangchu mutu ba rangchu ra khong ra tene ju ko shimbaji la tengo la de kala ko rangchu mutu ba de ba de ani khong ra tende indi kala ani gaja rangchu mutu ba tape na ngazu chi tongba ni na khari na chi ga ngosi wala gaja gora tende we de gaja de rangchu mutu ba la sha undu kala ra gaja rangchu mutu pa tes me par shuju ko tende we tanga tanga demba tu ba la gora demba tu ba kadang ngazu jesi demba ji tu na dendi chi tu gore la ra ta demba tu ba tende ji sha wa ina tende we demba tu ba su ge tu se sha sha ju de rangchu ge mutu ba chi ba kongres tende ko tu be na ani khasana tongba tang se tenjun ki se tenjun chi kasa tongba ta tenjun chi de chi de sun ro chi gi de chi de ro ra ro yu chula ya ko wa le par terwa na la digala dig sama ta tu na ani tongba da tenjun ni di parula ani jawa de abu ko tu de se.
So now, more particularly, if we are to make sense of law of causality within the framework of emptiness, then the Tibetan master Geshema Dawa advises us to think about it in this manner. Try to look at the tree first, a tree. And when you see a tree, even though it appears self-sustaining, self-existing, then try to analyze whether it is self-existing or self-sustaining. Then you come to realize that this tree as such is not self-existing or self-sustaining. It depends on a lot of other conditions and factors. So when you begin to understand that, you begin to understand that the tree is not self-existing. The tree is not self-sustaining. And now with that, you have come to understand that the tree lacks inherent nature. The tree is not inherently existing. Now, do not rest with only that insight. Now try to think about, okay, if the tree does not exist intrinsically, if the tree is not self-existing, then how does it actually exist? Right? And if you begin to think about it, you now come to the same point. The tree is a depending arising. Yes? The actual manner in which the tree exists is not as self-existing, but as a depending arising. It depends on so many causes and conditions. And when you are able to understand these two things, then on the basis of understanding that the tree is a dependent arising, in your meditation and contemplation of emptiness, now you are able to recognize very certainly the object of negation. That the more you understand the tree as a depending arising, then the more you are able to see that the object of negation in emptiness is a self-existing tree. An intrinsically existing tree. Now, the more you think about it, it should be the case that the more you think about the tree existing as a depending arising, then you are able to see the lack of intrinsic nature of the tree. And the more you think about the lack of intrinsic nature of the tree, it should be the case that the more clearly you are able to see the tree as a dependent arising. So, seeing the tree as a dependent arising, seeing the tree lacking any intrinsic nature should complement each other. And that's exactly what depending arising, that exactly is what law of causality is. Everything, nothing is accidental, everything comes about comes about due to causes and conditions.
Tadi nganzu ngaransu lide la ba khapo inara. Ta nganzu thani de be sani tungi tede de yor nganzu thani tele yo chura. Ine ya kesi nganzu gi chige so demba tuba ji sha ra. Jije khan la ma te be ransu ji tuba ji tamba le tomba ni to bala ane tiba tomba ni gi pha tongshi tongsa gi gashi do de musung ra. Ra gashi de kharisne kesi demba tuba tu suna su khan la ma te ge korang ane ransu gi tsu gu dos. 라 당당 아주 주단도 가리네 찍길 때다 되는 알아서 그 루주나 파말라 때래 사치밀은 좋아하실 때래 라 근데지 마대는 아주 네투 말아 근데 아주 참 찍질 당당 알아서 그 루디 망보질 때인데라 다 계시 근데 덴버 투버 란시기 투버 수 유물 수 투버지 요와이나 수 갈라야 마대 수투 요가 바지 라 근데지 고레스 근데 수 갈라야 마대 수투 투버디 먼저 갈라나 가자샤 근데 요 말라라 라 란시 갈라야 마대 그 투버도 요 말라디가라 간지 찔 땡고 바지 땡다 땡고 바디 땡디가라 땡주디 땡도다 라 진짜 근데 저 차는 되지
Then similarly try to now change the focus of the examination or analysis to our own sense of self later on. Then when we look at our sense of self and look at the basis of this body or the aggregates, then when we look at our sense of self, then we can appreciate the fact that we think of the self as something absolute, independent of causes and conditions. That's the kind of sense of self that we have. Now, when we begin to examine this sense of self, then we begin to realize that there indeed is no absolute, independent, unitary, permanent sense of self. And that indeed, even when we look at our body, it is a dependent arising. It comes from the union of our parents, and then the sustenance of this body also depends on the outer elemental, the constituent elements, earth, water, fire, and so forth. And when we begin to understand this, then we begin to realize that indeed the self is also a dependent arising. This body is also a dependent arising. And as such, just like we begin to see this tree is not self-existing, we begin to see that the self is also not self-existing or self-sustaining at all. And at that point, you are able to recognize the object of negation in emptiness. And now, if the self doesn't exist as self-sustaining, absolute, independent, unitary, and so forth, then how exactly does it exist? This is important to reflect on. Then you begin to understand that the self is a dependent arising. It depends on many causes and conditions. And so you have to kind of balance this two. Not only think about the manner in which it does not exist, but to think about the manner in which it actually does exist. And these two, depending arising, which is the manner in which it actually exists, and inherent existence, the manner in which it doesn't exist, should inform one and the other. When you begin to realize it lacks intrinsic nature, you should be able to naturally understand that it is a dependent arising. And when you begin to understand that it is a dependent arising, you should naturally be able to understand that it lacks intrinsic nature. And I remember when I first came from Tibet, we were granted an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And we were really young, 12, 13 years. And then it was a group of both lay and monastic people. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama addressed us and gave us like a short teaching. And at that point, His Holiness the Dalai Lama instructed the whole group to now close your eyes and meditate on emptiness. And now as 12, 13-year-olds, we have never heard of emptiness. And at that point, even though all the other people, the lay people as well as the monastic, they were meditating, and at that point, as 12, 13 years who have never heard of emptiness, we were just looking at each other and waiting for everyone else to finish meditating. But now we have some foundational understanding of emptiness. So as such, you can actually begin to approach the meditation of emptiness. Without any kind of study, maybe it's a little bit difficult to immediately begin meditating on emptiness.
Pena tanda chizo ina labzang che mambu chigida te lo. Ta nga zungi mayina tangbo tewe lo shingi mare, lo na kwaya ragi mare. Ne tsigi shen che yo mara. Pena chizo ro ina pyoyi tola ma she na ya, inji tola shingo re, hindi da kari leja da kari tola mambu lo shingi da. Nga zu tambo kaga kanga shingi mare, tene inji da jayi da tuzu da pazira ra, hindi da kanga kuchi shingi mara. Tene samana shira tang shingi mara. Tanda chizo ro ina maza ro jo ra. 수기 탭 담을 로야 뺏게 챔버시라 먼저기 지단 미기 탭 주를 묻지단데 마음 로야 개챔버 가시 주주로네 가서 주사 창설합니다. 감마치죠 아니면 테스트 로드나 아니 셈바 수바수바체 아니 테스트 삼당 시지라이다 아니 딘데 콜랑 가서 양데 로 삼당 에마도 람산디니 다리 장산이 시래데 칼레카브라.
So now maybe you are not like we were when we were young, because at that point we didn't even know how to read and write, let alone understand what exactly was being taught. And you, even though you don't speak or know Tibetan, I'm sure all of you have read extensively before in English many different books about it, and as such you have some foundational understanding of emptiness. So it is important to kind of have some foundational understanding based on your study first, before you can begin to effectively meditate on emptiness. And now, with regards to the manner in which one reflects and contemplates on emptiness, maybe this is not the approach to take. You read a book at one go, and then you expect to be able to effectively meditate and contemplate on emptiness. Maybe that's not the approach. Take your time with it. Don't even spend like a whole hour reading a book. Or each day, on a daily basis, read like for 10 to 15 minutes, and then reflect on what you have read in those 10 to 15 minutes over the course of a day, and then read another 10 to 15 minutes. And through that, your foundational understanding becomes more grounded, more solid, as opposed to reading it at all at one go, and then you do not have any kind of framework within which to make sense of it with your experience, with your reflection.
나온가 엔데르 찬스 나라 담 칸데도 제일로 남는데 내저스다 치즈치 이 메시에다 인도네 와라 때 참마 차라니 이 탭질로 아니다 차스 데스 시에드네 다시라민도 한 탭신 받을로 까마 쭈짱 니시즈도 빼고 니기더라 되네마 걸려 하고 문데 거 나통도 아니 마샤 니에샤레 세상 산나다에 리버치도 까마 쭈짱한데 디네리시 찍터나로다 카드 하고다 마마마는 바로
And now yesterday, after I completed my daily recitation, I do recitations for like an hour or two every day, and after I finished that, then I picked up a book that I have wanted to read for a long time, and I looked at the text itself, the root text that we have to cover, since there wasn't really much left to cover. Then I thought maybe I can take the time to read the book that I have wanted to read. And then I begin to realize that after 20 minutes, my attention begins to suffer. And now I cannot begin to gather my thoughts at all. My thoughts are no longer so cohesive anymore after 20 minutes. Up to 20 minutes, I was able to follow along exactly what the book was talking about. And I was able to make sense of my own reflections, but after 20 minutes, maybe it's a little bit difficult to cohesively reflect on something that you are reading. So maybe we make use of that short period wherein our attention is most cohesive.
지난데 디르다 가서 이만가서 야 이체 값은 야 치트치서 로르다. 탭징 로로로 야 녀브네 셴발로라. 야 셴발 녀녀 로로 탭 빼만 못 따거라. 디디가래 이체 감라다 카레네 칼레 카요 마레 디인데 용고나 대용고는 감라잖아. 야 디디가 남선 여도 책임다. 다당아서 파이 이체 따야 되는 미디가 안 테슬로 안 퍼버는 여도 차온다. 데 켄자도 셴발에.
But with that being said, it's really strange that when I was actually preparing and appearing for my examinations, then I didn't have this problem. Because at that point, I had a motivating factor that I have to do well in my exams. So even if I get bored with one text that I'm reading, immediately I change the text to read another book. At that point, your attention doesn't really become scattered in the same manner as it does now, because there is that intentionality, there is that motivation, that motivating factor of doing well in the exam. Any other questions? Maybe one last question?
About the tradition, this tradition, so is it meant about Mahayana or Buddhism in general?
Mahayana. Tandang anzu gi luk dela ni lhaji gi nyangde thangme lhaji gi nyangde injal hame gi nyangde samji ore la ida. Ina luk dela anzu gi ni luk dela tsushin do ni lo jona ni thangme gi nyangde ni yangda ba thogi re la sunge luk di la di anzu gi thekjing gi luk la gi ore bes di thekjing gi luk res. Yeah, it's the Mahayana.
지당 저기 마하야나다 지게 테라와딜이다. 라. 지당 니 이제 지게 당저 가실라나 대진 팀이래. 되게 전자 밀어 포우다. 디 포에 말에 지당 저 스이네 로 림바치는 저거라. 가서 변에 되네도 대바침부도 와라 깬자라야 되네. 가서 미지 깬자를 저거나 깬자 오마데 기침부라. 어머 사마기 되네. 디 오메바이네 되네. 로카부라. 지당 림바치라. 니네 단다 로게 사노 코당기 자체를 탄 거 대바 엄마 바말라 텐데 샤워르마도 디 멤버 디 마고야레 디 쪼르네 디 제레 마레 페나 아주 켄자질레 페샤네 켄자인데 켄자가나 토졌다 켄자 쭈로주나 디싱가데 페치 치가요 마르디 로말란 디기미다 아주 디갈레와라 인지미 들때오다 참마 개참버더라 세상 아주 그 대바 멤버레 대바 멤버 냐네 친이레 그 대체 말을 야츠데 그 팀이 바를 말을 디자원이 시리요 라 안절로 rumba ganza sama panajine dogora.
So now when we are talking about traditions, then we talk about the Theravada tradition and the Mahayana tradition in Buddhism. Now some people have the attitude as looking at the Theravada tradition as somewhat being lesser of a tradition, and the Mahayana as some sort of a greater tradition than the Theravada tradition. That I think is very, very ill-advised. It's not something wise at all. Because try to think about it in this manner, that if we want to train our mind effectively, there are stages to it. You cannot immediately expect to train your mind effectively immediately. There are stages to training your mind. And then similarly, try to think about this example. If there is a staircase that you have to climb, then you have to climb on each step. And then if you when you reach the top, and then you begin to say that the first two steps are somewhat lesser than the top steps, then it doesn't make sense at all. The first two steps as well as the 10th step are all essential for you to effectively reach the top. So similarly, the Theravada tradition and the Mahayana tradition is similar to this. That the Theravada tradition and the Mahayana tradition is not differentiated on the basis of something being less effective as a tradition being lesser or less effective. It's about the scope of motivation which defines these two traditions. And so as such, we should look at these traditions as steps on a spiritual path. And as such, without a foundational practice, it is impossible for us to achieve the far-reaching or ultimate goal, as it is the example with the staircase.
Pena nganzu tiba chimboyi jila kashi karamanzu sanna tanda nganzu tiba memba hagoya sanna tanda dan rali ura sanna pena rani jibu taba taba dan ani rani jibu ani jingen sole teya sanna taba ani rani jibu taba teya teni ya pane jina ko sanna dodan jira nganzu peche nganzu tiba memba lo dido kide wadara nganzu kushi lo jibu le de ura.
And now, if you are truly a Mahayana practitioner, then it should be the case that you are able to put others' welfares, others' concerns before your own selfish concerns. But this is not the case when we really try to look at ourselves carefully. Even if you do begin to identify as a Mahayana practitioner, let alone putting aside your own concerns for liberation, own concerns for a favorable rebirth, just in this very lifetime, if you cannot accommodate others' concerns, others' welfare, then how does that exactly figure into you being a Mahayana practitioner? This is more important to reflect on.
Tagana singe tana nganzu tutaya, nambegi tutaya shira. Tutanga yamana tanda. Tende tutaya, tunda oma doza, ane koma ya shayagi tablan ro chayda. Chezan peshan nala karisu nana, tunda koma la chodo zune, oma la dawa maja osu. Ta tutaya gama doza paya shiro, oma doza tende ro de apoya mado la merataya ro da magaya suya ro, tende surung mares. Kasana koma ya leya de oma gi kadengi ra, chezan chikchila pento de ya tende yinza. Chezan ngazu chik tunda oma ya nyamle chenyi nare, tunda oma ki chik sanu koto de, mare tenpa ya oma ki sanu tangwa ina ra, lo ki sanu tanda doza koma kali ya ndoya le pento wara. Tende yinza changma chibata ya de peke shimada.
So, even the scriptures are very clear, even when we are talking not just about these two traditions, even when we are talking about the different traditional classical Buddhist schools of thought. And then there are 4 such schools of thoughts. And the scriptures are very clear in advising us not to look at the first 2 schools as somewhat being of a lesser school, lesser philosophical school of thought than the later 2. Because without the foundational framework of the first 2 schools, philosophical foundational framework of the first 2 schools, it is impossible for the tenets of the later 2 schools to arise at all. So we stop here and break for tea.